Okay, so now that we have prepared our project and the testing environment in order to follow a behavior-driven development approach, we will start with the first feature that we have identified, the registered restaurant feature. As you remember, we have already defined a file for that feature where we have placed the name of the feature and also a small description based on a template that forces us to think about what we want to attain with that particular feature. And now we will start following the behavior-driven development approach to define, specify one feature by a set of scenarios. This is the approach in this kind of development approaches. The idea is that we have these scenarios that are like samples of the behavior that we expect connected with that particular feature, that are easy to describe. Also, we can involve even stakeholders that are not developing software developers, but just even the final clients of this application, so they can help us during the specification process. Basically, because these files are basically text describing these situations or scenarios. Every scenario is described by a set of steps, and that are basically lines in these scenarios. And there are three kinds of steps. There are steps labeled given that are connected with the preconditions, which is the situation at the beginning of the scenario, the starting point. Then we also have usually just one step labeled when, that is connected with the feature. It's where the action happens, connected with the feature. In this case is where we try to register a restaurant. In this case it's just using its name. And we also have steps labeled then, that are the postconditions or outcomes. What is the situation at the end of the scenario? What is the status given that the action has happened, the action in the when. When we have more than one step connected with one of these labels, for instance, here we have two different then steps, then in order to make it easier to read, we replace the second then or further then that we might have with and. So the outcome is that it's easier to read the full scenario like it was a big sentence. In this case, we can also observe that there is a separate background that is defining steps that should be executed or should happen before every scenario. Okay, so in this case, the given in the scenario is that I log in as user with password. So in order to be able to log in and to succeed, it is required that that particular user exists. So we will need this step, this additional given that defines that that user exists, and then that I can log in using that user. But if this is a very repetitive step, or all these steps that are very repetitive that are happening at the beginning of every scenario, it's a good practice to move them to the background, because this way it will be executed and we don't need to repeat it each time. In this case, we are not also moving the given I login, because later I will also experiment with scenarios where I didn't log in. So the idea is that in order to be able to customize them, I will not place the I login also in the background, because otherwise I will have a problem trying to try not being logged in other scenarios later. As you can also see, all the steps are right now marked in yellow. This is because they are not implemented yet, and in this case the plugin for Jerkin inside PyCharm is complaining about that. And also, if I try to execute behave, from the command line. As you remember, is the tool that is dealing with this jerking syntax and implementing the behavior-driven development approach. If I execute it, we will see that it's complaining about that it's missing the directory where it's going to look for the steps implementation. So we will just create it, a new directory in the features folder. So here we will place the implementations of the steps. So if we now execute again, behave, now it changes a lot, because what we can see here is that it's complaining about these steps not being implemented, the same that is doing the plugin. So one option now will be to start implementing these steps based on the output by behave, or use what is provided by PyCharm, the implementation that is provided by PyCharm, to start implementing these steps. Both options are good.